So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm here this afternoon with Eve Mailer from ForgeRock, the CTO, as of last April, I believe, or April 2020. What a year that was. And we're delighted to have Eve along with us. I know your schedule's really busy, so thanks ever so much for making time to chat with us. But what we wanted to ask, really, Eve, was about your story to where you find yourself today. How did you get into the whole world of tech, never mind identity? And we'll explore a little bit further on then what lessons you've learned along the way and what your messages might be for the industry at large, but also particularly for other women who might be following in your footsteps. So, Eve, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's very nice to be here, Karen.
It's great to see you. And as I said, thanks so much for actually making time to chat with us. So tell me, you've been at ForgeRock, I think now about 11, 12 years, is it?
7 years, very
7
packed years.
Okay, sorry.
ForgeRock has been around that long.
Right.
Yep.
So how did you get started, and where did you kind of get onto the whole tech bandwagon?
In my case, it was really pretty circuitous. I studied linguistics at university, and not really computational linguistics, although it was adjacent. I wasn't like, studying ancient languages or anything like that. And when I moved into, having a career, the first thing I did was I became a technical editor for software documentation, actually with Digital Equipment Corporation. So we're going way back, dear departed DEC. That was fascinating to me, and I learned so much about different technologies there. It led me to work on what we thought of as doc tools, right? Okay. So how you publish information. And ultimately that led me to working on SGML. And SGML, this is the predecessor to XML, SGML DTDs, which are the schemas, the document type definitions behind your, the tag language that you're inventing, basically. So, HTML is like sort of an example. In the process of that, I co-wrote a book about designing and modeling DTDs, and that sort of turned me into being kind of a methodologist. I don't know if that's a word, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
And my SGML work led me to be invited to contribute to the creation of XML. So I was like one of those approximately dozen people. And that background led me to be asked to contribute to some things. By then I'd moved into Sun Microsystems, dear departed Sun. And there were people working on the standardization of security for the internet. And we weren't really calling it identity quite so much yet, but I recommended starting the SAML technical committee and ended up running that committee for quite some time. But there were a lot of early MLs, markup languages. Yeah. So my XML background led me into new areas, and that led me into things like the Universal Business Language and then SAML. And then before we knew it, there was kind of this whole huge identity thing.
Okay. So basically there's a story and a thread in there about languages, and the kind of the way we actually communicate. And one of the things that we talk a lot about at Women in Identity is the fact that it's kind of hard sometimes for people to even understand what the identity industry is all about, unless you're dyed in the wool and right in the heart of it. It can appear a very technical, a very difficult to kind of get hold of sector, and yet it's one of the most human in terms of what it's enabling, what it's allowing people to actually have access to. So what do you think, the industry's doing to humanize itself a little bit better?
Well, I think the category of civil identity has brought things really front and center. Our responsibilities to populations who use digital identity or don't use digital identity yet. I'm constantly aware of kind of this theme of how much autonomy do people have, kind of the broadening what privacy really has impacts around. These are very live discussions everywhere, and identity has something to say about them and has something to listen to intently about as well. We want to be sure that, we're applying, proper ethics to everything we do in identity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think as we see those programs growing into territories and populations that haven't necessarily had the whole sort of identity infrastructure in an analog format that they can just simply digitize, that's when we start to see real kind of cracks perhaps appearing. So I know you're very keen on innovation. You're working a lot on the innovation labs and with obviously with the future of the industry. So what do you think we can do to actually look at making the whole identity sector more inclusive in the way it looks at products? So the products and the features and facilities you're developing now, how are you looking at it from the lens of inclusion?
Well, I head up our innovation labs at ForgeRock, and innovation is all about listening to the still small voices and, the contrary opinions, and really achieving diversity in so many dimensions. Diversity of thought is so important to test your assumptions. I have a colleague who's constantly talking about pressure testing assumptions, pressure testing metrics and things. And so innovation is about finding the unexpected or counterintuitive way, perhaps, to solve a problem. Maybe not having to compromise when you think that there are trade-offs, for example. So having all the diverse voices and talents and styles, to me, is critically important. And also perhaps being humble about what I don't know. Not even perhaps, definitely, there's a lot I don't know.
So do you find it, like at ForgeRock, with some of the work you're doing there, that you're bringing in people from right across the business to hear those different voices? Or how do you get to that point where it's not just the classic product teams, the classic tech teams that are then working on the innovations, and you are getting more voices?
Well, we have actually taken on kind of a remit of helping with cross-functional and innovation culture throughout the organization. And for us to be successful, one of the things we have to achieve is get a whole bunch of not just stakeholders, but smarties at the table to achieve anything. And we actually instituted a program early this year that has become really successful internally that we call the CTO Lounge.
Okay.
And we actually have guilds internally at ForgeRock. And we started this thing as a lounge, and we have started to describe it kind of like an ad hoc guild for whatever really needs discussing, this week. And we're starting to see upwards of 25, 30 people attend these sort of very fit for purpose topic lounges.
Yeah.
And it gives people a chance to participate in innovation, participate in ideation, participate in the conversation, who normally sort of as part of their day job would never think to take an hour out, but can. And then we derive, key takeaways from that. And actually we're working on sort of larger external to ForgeRock community efforts as well. And we have a lounge there too, so stay tuned.
Oh, fantastic. So that sounds very much like you're moving in the direction that we should be in, but sadly it doesn't always happen that way, which is problem solving first, and the technology is the enabler, the technology is the part of the solution, but actually identifying what the problem is in the first place.
Yes, I mean, we pay attention to hype, but we kind of look for solving something concrete. So, those are sort of guideposts, but it's way fun to do things this way. And it attracts, people from all corners. And that's one of the things I love. And we've been discussing internally actually as well, particularly since so many of us are communicating on Zoom and other things like this, that, how do we make sure to be inclusive to people who are normally quiet and often quieter when you don't have the paradigm for how you speak up objectively established.
And I guess that's the archetypal challenge, isn't it? We've talked about how do we get more women into the tech space? How do we get sort of people from those underrepresented minorities or groups, or even just neurodiversity into the discussions? What's been your learning as you've not even just now where you are, but as you've gone through the years? What have you actually experienced to help sort of overcome some of that?
One of the things is, thinking about quiet people, people who may have different ways of communicating, is we'll provide a diversity of channels to communicate. We have a very live wiki. We take recordings of everything. We derive key takeaways. We invite reaching out on, Slack, an internal tool, and we try to reduce friction, think of ways and measure whether we're really reducing friction to, in our case, we're looking at innovation and a number of, related things, but, are you getting new participants? Are you getting, like, one of the things we do is we run the our thought leadership and evangelism program. So an evangelist can be anybody who speaks or writes on behalf of ForgeRock. We're just getting to the point of maturity where we can look at, well, how many new people are we pulling into that program who may have expressed a wish to maybe give their first talk, but they're not currently on the evangelist channel. So what do we do about that? How do we reach them? So those are some of the things that we're doing.
Fantastic. Yeah, so it's pretty broad church that you're involving there. So going back then to where you started out from, you mentioned you did linguistics. What have been your biggest learnings as a woman in this tech, very male-dominated space over the years? How have you managed to navigate and circumvent challenges that come along? And what have been your biggest learnings?
I've spent so much time in standards, and standards are actually really about building ecosystems, successful ecosystems, and thinking about how the pieces go together systemically is something that we really need more of. When I pondered your question earlier, what came to mind was when we were working on SAML, which so many of our colleagues use now. There are about 3 of us women in the general population of SAML technical committee members. It was actually me and Marlena Erdos and Heather Hinton, very smart, talented people. And I admit we sometimes referred to ourselves as the security chicks because we had to stick together. And I think we were able to contribute fully, but thinking back on why that was, we were at least mid-career. We were all free with sharing our opinions. And that's something I had to learn to do early in my career. And
that's very interesting. Not to cut you over, because one of the things that we've talked about a lot is it about for women who struggle to speak up, is it confidence or is it content? Do we have our opinions? Do we know what we want to shout about and fight for? Or is it simply we've got them, but we haven't got the confidence to step forward? And it's a really interesting debate. From what you're saying, it can often be actually, what's your opinion?
I started out as somebody with strong opinions, but who was nonetheless a kind of a timid introvert. And not all introverts are timid, I suppose, but I was at the time. And I remember there was the SGML conference I went to, and I went to it because I was doing SGML, and but I was invited to give a talk about the subject that we were writing this book about, the developing SGML DTDs. And I'd never in my life done such a thing. And I had to work really hard to prepare for that with my co-author, Jeanne Al-Andalusi. So 2 women. By the way, throughout our book, there's all the examples are recipes. Real recipes that we use. I remember going to this conference, which I knew all the players, I'd worked with them in sort of standards settings and whatnot. I knew these people, but there was this one guy in particular who was always surrounded by a cloud of people. And I sort of sat there going, I wish I could do that. What is it he's doing that I could do? Because I was in the camp of, well, no shortage of strong opinions. And I think that's sort of, comes from my family background and our habits and everything. But do I speak up? What would happen? And I just started, I wanted to kind of be him. And so I observed what he did to get the cloud of people around him. And over time, I guess in a way I did. I'm a bit of a goofball. I was definitely not a goofball then. And I'm very free with things that I think are fun that bring a spark of excitement to what I do. I do that as a standards team leader. I hope I do that as a leader of the team that I'm running now. I think it helps to get a little free.
So where did that confidence come from to do that? What made the difference between standing in the shadows and watching, watching the guy with the cloud of people? I hope I haven't actually put her off with my questions, but
I did not think Sabrina was going to make an appearance on this because I wasn't preparing for this to actually go around. I'm going to have to kick her out if she behaves herself one more time. Hi, everybody. This is Sabrina.
Welcome.
Yeah, there she goes.
Welcome.
Oh my goodness. Embarrassed. I usually plan to be blocked off.
if the last year has taught us anything, it's that we've all got dogs, children, cleaners, delivery people.
Random people coming through there with a delivery.
I was asking you about
yeah.
what helped you step out of the shadows into that limelight and take that next step.
It was trying a few things. I also had a background, and I think this helped me. I had a background as a musician and a musical performer. So I admit that gives me a leg up, but I think everybody has something like that they're confident about. And I'm currently calling the husband to make her go away. There we go.
Now that's really, I find that fascinating, that link between musicians, linguistics, and then into the computer science side. That's so
it is a kind of communication.
Integrated.
I just saw an article in Scientific American about how music can literally heal the heart because of the different patterns and things. And like, okay, maybe it can heal a lot of things. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. It's universal. Absolutely. But it's the language message again. And I'm finding that really interesting. I'm not surprised you've now, said that you have a musical background, because often that's the link, isn't it? There's a really close, tight link between linguistics and then into computer languages as well. So yeah, that's particularly interesting to me. Anyway, I was going to ask you, what would be one of your big recommendations if you were to sit down with the industry and you were doing a stop-start, continue type of kind of feedback exercise? What would you say to the identity CEOs who are now looking forward post-pandemic, hopefully, into a new kind of world? What are we looking at?
Boy, one of the things I've learned even most recently is it does come down to accepting a lot of different communication styles. And, it's something I've actually been working on. Here I am working on the leadership team of ForgeRock, and I still have many things to learn about ways to be effective in communication for different audiences. Although I must say recently, I was asked, how would you describe what ForgeRock does to a group of kindergarten kids, to this, to that? And one of them was the Queen of England. And I picked Queen Elizabeth I and wrote a sonnet, my first sonnet. There's a communication style I did not think I'd have to use. So who knows, I might be publishing that soon. But that's an example of, that's maybe an outlier way of communicating, but, trying it and having somebody consciously be receptive to different ways of communicating. Again, understand some people have a soft voice, some people maybe are a little more prolix, and sometimes there's value in it. And I think where there isn't value in it, innovation does not come from, she's mastered the doorknob principle, by the way. Innovation doesn't come from everybody nodding in unison. And it doesn't necessarily come from hearing the same voices over and over. And so maybe gently asking somebody, what do you think about this, when they're not the person who brought it up and they're not the person with the hand up, just to make sure every corner is heard from, can produce really interesting insights. I actually find that with my team. Every single person is completely different, and we form this awesome whole. And I rely on everybody to be who they are and nobody else. So I think all leaders need to sort of, decide on that.
Yeah, and it's interesting you touch on the communication styles, because we started this conversation, it was pretty technical. It was full of, let's face it, jargon and lots of acronyms that some of us may understand and some of us may not. And I do think there's a challenge for the identity industry to tell its story better and to tell it in a more sort of human embracing manner, as you say, whether you're talking to kindergarten children, whether you're talking to my mother or my children or whoever, but actually they all understand the need for identity verification. They've all been through ID checks, they've all been through the process. But this world with attributes and authentication and verification and
it is very complicated. And in the main, I think, honestly, to the average person, individual who interacts with these technologies, frankly, in the main, irrelevant to them. I mean, they didn't
Absolutely.
ask to be verified, for example. That's somebody else's need that they're acquiescing to and needing to.
Yeah,
So that again is an ecosystem thing, right?
absolutely.
You know, making sure that you make it relevant to people. And I think there is relevance to be had, but we have to go one level deeper.
Yeah, exactly. And recognizing that the person who's got to go through the journey, it never asked to be verified, never asked to be, you know, authenticated. So I think, yeah, that's an important message. If we can help, certainly in organizations like Women in Identity, to make that story more human, to bring forward the stories of people on the ground who struggle sometimes to be recognized and be verified, then I think that'll be a job well done. What would you like to see the industry stop doing? What's it not doing well at the moment?
I guess I'm prepared for this question, but I'm going to essay something here. Stop touting the benefits of identity that have within them lurking threats. So, you know, there's a lot of talk about wallets, a lot of work on wallets.
Yeah.
And I think we need to understand the downsides and kind of crystallize the potential inherent downsides a lot more. And to be able to do that, we do a lot of marketing to individual people about what we do. And I think we need to do an analysis exercise and, you know, think about the SWOTs. I'm a great one for SWOTs. I like them. So, you know, there are some things that, you know, digitizing versus keeping things on paper. As anybody in healthcare with the whole kind of electronic health record revolution will tell you, can make vulnerabilities be enhanced. We can have greater vulnerabilities when we digitize things that weren't digitized before. And maybe it's security through obscurity, but what can we do about the unintended consequences?
Yeah, absolutely.
So stop constantly pushing the positives and take a moment to reflect on the potential negatives and how what people really want.
Yeah,
kind of it relates to your previous one, but I think it is a stop.
Yeah, and I often wonder, is the identity a sector that actually having an inherent competition between the vendors and is that a risk? Because by simply wanting to always be better technically or more features, more functionality, does that actually pose a risk to what we're all trying to achieve?
Sometimes I do wish we could sort of consolidate gains that we've had, but also be honest about things where we thought we were successful and, you know, maybe we're not so, like, you know, federated authentication. Yeah. Federated, you know, sharing of attributes, not so much. And of course, there are people working on that, and you need people working on it if you think it's a benefit, but who is it benefit to? Cui bono, you might ask. So like, I mean, I love competition, and you worry in cybersecurity about a monoculture solving the same thing, you know, solving a problem the same way all the time. So diversity in solutions is great. I'm in favor. But for those who do not sell directly to consumers, I have this sort of little doctorals on my shoulder saying, don't say consumers. And I do like saying individuals and recognizing individuality. I do think it's valuable for us to ask who the audience really is for what we're saying, and recognize that identity is enabling. It's a tool for achieving some outcomes. And what are the outcomes? I actually have, some people call me the Queen of Venn. I have this new Venn diagram about the drivers of identity, and it's got 4 different sets in it. You know, there is protection, security protection, and so on. There is personalization, and people do get benefits from that mutually with, you know, service providers, but there's also payment. And we're seeing more techniques now that don't use traditional identity at all for payment. Cough, crypto, and people is my 4th P that I add. And, you know, privacy compliance doesn't do it for me alone when it comes to taking care of people. And that's what you started this conversation with.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And I think just when you're talking about the language there that we use, I heard a great quote the other day that there's only 2 industries that use the term user. One is identity, and the other is drugs.
It's drugs. I only heard that myself for the first time this week. That's so funny. It's funny, sad.
Yeah,
It'd be funny
absolutely.
if life weren't so sacred.
When citizen consumers, individuals. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Just before we wrap up then for the afternoon, what I guess would be your greatest advice to the younger you, or to the women coming behind you, or if you have family that you would like to inspire, what is it that you would like to pass on?
Obviously, the identity and cybersecurity industries really need strong talent now. I mean, we've got this shortage. It's really important to get right. There's many places, I would tell the younger me and others who may be in a similar situation, there's many places you are welcome. You owe it to yourself to find the right match. So, digital identity's first and highest calling is to connect to individuality with privacy and security, plain and simple. And so each of us deserves that same respect in the workplace. So seek it out, and you will find it.
Fantastic. Eve, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's been absolutely great. We're very, very grateful to ForgeRock for supporting women in identity as well, so much as they do, and hope to continue that for many, many years to come. But yeah, for now, from all of the members who'll be watching this, and from all of us who work on the volunteer team, thank you so much, and we'll catch up with you again soon.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Bye-bye.
welcoming me, Sabrina. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye to Sabina as well.